Everybody, you should know that who I am, Kat Carasello. You know, most of you are familiar with my work in Mythos Journey Work and my work in Journey Path Institute. And we're talking today about the heart of depth coaching. It's a panel discussion, so it's not just me talking. And that's why I want to open it up right away, because really it's tapping into those people who have come with my invitation today to talk about their experience going through the Creative Depth Coaching certification, and also what the heart of depth coaching is for them. And I won't ask that now. We'll have other conversations, but that really is what we're doing here today. So Megan and Susan, looks like you're ready to go. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here. So my name's Susan Lang. I'm based in a small city near Toronto, Canada. And I have been immersed in the work of creative depth coaching, and I'm a certified creative depth coach for a number of years now. I took Kat's course several years ago and have been involved in supporting the Institute as well. I coach in an organizational context in healthcare leaders, and I also work with women who are really interested in making life change in the sort of later years of their lives. And for me, this work is a beautiful dovetail to the depth and creative and spiritual and deep leadership work that my clients bring to me. So that's me in a nutshell. Passionate creative, passionate seeker, passionate creative depth coach.
Yeah, wonderful. Megan?
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Carlock, and I also have been through this amazing course that I can't recommend enough. I'm a certified creative depth coach. And I'm sure we'll talk more about our experience in the program, but I'll tell you where I am now. I specialize, I'm a counselor and creative depth coach that specializes in working with trauma. The population I typically work with is either foster and adoptive parents, or right now I'm doing a lot of intensive work helping people from healing from the fire experience they've had in Northern California. So doing a lot of intense work with people who have gone through a lot of trauma with natural disasters.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's incredible work, and it's incredible to weave the work together that I've done in the program with the populations who are really, figuring out how to navigate trauma.
Yeah. It's exciting to hear from both of you this sense of how to, in Susan's case, how to weave the work into an existing position. And in Megan's case, sort of the dynamic, raising kids and all kinds of different irons in the fire, right?
Yes.
No pun intended, because this work that you've developed as with an expertise in trauma is something that we do work with in the program, and you have a background that really took you in this direction. So there was a wonderful way that the work has evolved, and that the creative depth coaching actually was part of that evolution.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about it, actually. It's tempting to jump in right now, but I'll wait.
Well, we can jump in. I am inviting in another panelist. Sometimes getting on Zoom is a little tricky. So, I have panelists coming in and out, and sometimes getting on Zoom is tricky. And we're working on it, and we'll do our best with it, and then we'll see how this evolves. But again, it's like a casual opportunity for us to be here, and we're not here to be perfect. We're not here to have some kind of a slick presentation. We're here in real time, real world stuff. And so I'm going to let Darcy introduce herself now, and then we'll jump into conversation, and I may have one more panelist popping on. So we'll see. Darcy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello and good morning, and please excuse me, Mercury in retrograde is still affecting me over here. I am Darcy Helene. I have been a part of Journey Path Institute gratefully for a few years, for more than a few years, really since its inception. And creative depth coaching has been something that I've woven into my repertoire along the way. I work as a coach, focusing on reinvention and recovery mainly with clients. I have a history of really a myriad of recovery from different addictions, different states of being, and have explored healing on lots of different levels, using creative depth coaching as a catalyst, which I'm sure we'll get into. Practice yoga. Currently am just in a pretty tremendous transition and kind of reinventing for myself what it looks like to be a woman professionally and personally, and just how I engage the world.
Wow, love that. Yeah, so, Darcy has a background as a therapist, as a trained therapist, so she comes with the therapeutic clinical background, but again, this dovetailing and layering and developing practice, professional practice, personal practice. And I heard that I'm personally going through another transition time. And, I'll be interested to hear as we get into the questions, how each of you are able to use some of the techniques and some of the developmental tools for personal and professional work, because I think it goes both ways. And, one serves the other, and we're always evolving. So I love that. And Jan, thank you.
You're
I was
welcome.
just saying a few minutes ago, I think Jan was here with another email address and I didn't recognize it. So see, I said, we're here. We're not trying to slick it up. It's a casual conversation. Our panelists are now officially here. So Jan, can you introduce yourself?
I will. Thank you, Kat. I'll just echo what Darcy said. 7 planets in retrograde is not helping on the tech side this morning. I had trouble getting in, but I finally got in, which is great. And I would love to introduce myself. I am a creative depth coach. I took Kat's CDCC training a year ago, so I'm coming up on a year anniversary. And to say that the year in CDCC was transformative and this second year as a coach has been transformative would be a huge understatement. Currently, I work with women who are highly creative and highly spiritual, and they are looking for a way to use their creative gifts in a much deeper way, not just making a product. And most of the women I work with are in middle age or after. A lot of them are retired and they're into sort of a life identity reinvention. Who am I now is really the question they're asking, and they are looking to bring forward their creative gifts as a way of moving forward in their lives into an entirely new chapter of their lives. And so for myself as a visual artist for 30 years, it's very easy for me to work with them and say, yes, let's look at how you're using your art to take yourself to the next level. And then I also have a calling to work around grief and loss. And so that's part of my work that's evolving.
Yeah.
And I'm actually anxious to see where that goes in the coming months.
Yeah, so welcome to all of you. This is such an amazing way for us to be present and really active in the work. So for any of you who are starting to think about next steps, we all come up to this place in our lives where we have a sense of something new, something else, something's getting ready to shift. I call it a calling. Any number of challenging or energetic impasses can actually be a trigger. When I personally came into relationship with this work 15 years ago, it was a breakdown. And I think some of us are literally experiencing breakdown to breakthrough right now. In fact, two of you mentioned we have 7 planets in retrograde and a lot of tumultuous energy this summer, this year. And many of us, may have experienced a tremendous amount of grief and loss, a tremendous amount, a sense of dis-ease or dismay even, coming back around to those kinds of energies that feel like they're undermining or diverting us. But on the other side of that energy, we catch a sense of what's next, what if, how can I? So when each of you were anticipating, I'm probably going to just say 2 of you answer this question. When you were anticipating CDCC, when you were in the midst of the journey, recognizing something was ready to shift, what drew you to the program? What excited you about the program or offered you something in language or tone or quality, creative process? What felt compelling to you and what drew you in? And what were you experiencing at the time? Because I think that's important that we talk about real experience of, wherever it is that we are. And sometimes it's raw and sometimes it's not. Who wants to share?
I'll answer that, Kat, because it was such a clear experience for me. There was so much actual clarity around knowing that CDCC was the next step for me. It was a time when I was processing my own grief and loss over my mother's, passing, her battle with dementia. I was also at a career impasse, being an artist, but no longer feeling fulfilled by the kind of art that I was making and no longer fulfilled by the type of teaching that I was offering and the way I was working with students. And you alluded to this a moment ago about wanting more or knowing that you needed something more. And the thing that really drew me to the program, now, of course, I'd been doing work with you for, a few seasons of Quest work, but what really drew me is that creative depth coaching is a big enough container to fold in so many different kinds of things. One thing I personally hate is being limited, and I hate having to go through reinventions very quickly because I outgrow things quickly. And so this was something I had never encountered before, a container, a process, a structure that was big enough to hold everything and continue to expand. So in terms of folding this into what I already did, learning to bring new things in, I knew that I'd never run out of space. So this could really carry me forward for 30 years of the rest of my life's work. And I remember saying that to you, that I know this is my calling and the work for the rest of my life. And I won't have to go through the struggle of, oops, outgrew that, oops, a new thing. This can hold it all. And I don't think there's another modality of coaching or working with people that is really like that. This is so expansive. It's like elastic. It expands every time you need it to. And I think that's really amazing.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And I love that that's not only was that the impetus for coming in, but that's been your experience moving through the program itself and beyond now as you've been building. So we'll hear more about that later, but I love that. Who else would like to jump in with that sense of, as you were anticipating this program, what was happening in your life and what drew you to it? What felt compelling? What felt important?
I can speak to that.
Great.
For me, like Jan, I really can relate to what Jan is saying, but for me, what was happening in my life at the time was a few things. I had finished graduate school and sort of thought, oh, when I'm done with graduate school, my career will take off and just magically appear. And that wasn't happening. And I also I have 3 children who I adopted. And so I was home with them for a number of years, but they were getting to an age where they were really ready to have me leave the nest and return to work. But things weren't becoming clear for me about how to take my career in the next direction. What is the next step for me? I did know that I was drawn to Jungian-based work. I had worked with you in a different capacity, taking other classes of yours that felt really compelling for me and drew work out of me that I hadn't anticipated before that, and that were really profound. So I knew I wanted to follow that thread. And for me, what I hoped going into the program, and what I suspected based on the things we had talked about and what I had read about it, was I had hoped that I could come to an understanding of what my next career steps were, while adding a little bit more of credibility, professional credibility, by having a certificate, but also by doing deeper personal work that I then wanted to forward to people that I was working with. And what I hadn't realized really would happen, and luckily did, was that the end tail of the program really helped me shape that practice and put things into practice in a way that my graduate student program hadn't, in a way that no other certificate program had ever done before. Actually helped me figure out how to make this inner work part of my outer work and professional work reality.
Yeah. Now, I want to speak to that for a minute because, of course, I've done certification programs myself. I'm a certified coach through Debbie Ford's program and did a lot of mentoring with her. And, you know, you speak to something interesting about this program. I was really determined to learn from what I hadn't found before in programs, which was, you know, a certain element that would develop as we went using the experiential learning, and then have a mastermind element going along as parallel process. You know, so we utilize both the program, the individual coaching, and that mastermind, plus the cohort itself, right? And each of you were in different cohorts. I should mention that, you know, not everybody knows each other intimately, and people have traveled in different cohorts. But it's really interesting that you found that, and that is a design of the program. And so one of the things I love hearing from you all is, you know, even years later, how the program worked for you, and did I dial it in well enough? You know, that's good feedback for me. So thank you. Let's move on and just get, you know, a little bit more. And I want to remind everybody who's on the line, use the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions you have, either specifically to a person or generally, and I'll just choose someone on the panel to answer for you if if it's not directly to me. Feel free to ask me a direct question too. So, speaking about the program, we've all mentioned this idea that there was some kind of a calling, some kind of an impetus or impasse or readiness to launch. Was there a unique element once you got into the program, once you said yes? How hard, did anyone have a hard time saying yes? Raise your hand. Did you all feel pretty sure by the time you went through sort of the interview process and thinking about it? Okay, great. I mean, that's part of what we're doing here, is saying there's a process of getting ready and saying yes. So when you said yes and when you started the program, was there a unique element in the program that you saw and got right away? Was there something about the design of the program or the way the material met you that right away felt this is really a unique way to learn? I really want to get your take on the learning journey itself and what it felt like to be in the program, and maybe even initially, because there's always that little bit of a, I'm so excited, oh my gosh, I'm jumping in, new threshold, right? But anybody, what was your sense of unique parts of the program? And what was your experience with that?
I'll speak to that first, Kat. When you're asking, all of us are nodding. It's like, was there an immediate yes? It's like there was. And I also want to be really transparent and share that I also anticipated a great deal of resistance was going to come up because I felt such a calling, because the yes was so strong in saying, absolutely, excuse me, there's little dogs.
No worries. Dogs are
there's such a sincere and undeniable yes for me to invest in myself and invest in this program. And with that, fears came up and resistance came up, and having the format of going through self as client and coaching concepts and having built-in check-ins and places to share without too much of a regimen, an ability for me to be accountable to myself, be accountable to you and the other people in the cohort. But then also the mythic themes. It's like, okay, I have a to-do list of different things that I can check off, that part of me I do really well. And then what about the going into the depths of something creative that maybe I don't fully understand or won't fully understand, to access that different part of myself. And from the gate, before actually being officially enrolled in the Creative Depth Coaching program cohort, I knew that was the balance that I needed. I needed to be led in and held in going really deep, and also coming back to the surface and having that, that to-do list, if you will, the curriculum.
Yeah, and I love you're talking about flexibility and structure both being present, which is really the design of experiential learning. How much, when you have core concepts and you have things and your mythic themes, how much of your time is spent musing? How much of your time is spent art making? How much of your time is spent reading? And how much of your time is spent responding? I mean, my guess, it's like 70% of that musing time and that thinking time and taking it to the creative process is so much bigger, because we need spaciousness to actually do depth work. So I love that you mentioned resistance, because of course comes up for all of us, but that there was a design that held you, that gave you enough flexibility, that you were able to do what you needed to do. Great, good. Who else?
For me, Kat, as someone who has a full-time job and was working full-time and was also doing client coaching clients on the side, because I came to Creative Depth Coaching as a coach, and someone who's spent my life in adult education contexts, I so fell in love and appreciated the structure and the flexibility. My experience was that it suited me in all of the complexity of myself as an adult learner. Whether I was reading or whether I was integrating my own art practice and deepening my own art practice, having the flexibility to be able to know, oh, I've got a heavy week at work, or I've got some time and space now because of my other obligations, and being able to flow with the material. And I was able to take the material and begin to kind of utilize it right away. So, I'd be working with ideas that we had in the course, and I'd find, wow, I'm having a conversation in my professional environment that is bringing that into, I'm able to use it right away in this conversation, or I'm getting triggered to go deeper in my own work. And the art making has continued to speak to me and be very much aligned with the cognitive and intellectual piece of my journey as a coach. So adding that in served all of the previous coaching training I did, and has continued to serve me. So it was kind of like it's been a linchpin kind of fulcrum process that everything else before it and after it kind of is kind of still rests on. So it was such a rich time, but it gave me the flexibility I needed as a busy person to really make it my own. So I appreciated the structure and the approach you used for adult learners.
Yep.
Very helpful.
I have a question that just came up, Susan. I'm going to keep you on and ask this question to you. Claire asked, can you say more about the mythic themes that are involved? That aspect really appeals to me, and I'd like to understand a bit more about how they integrate into the course. Susan, can you answer that for me?
Well, there's a mythic theme. So I think the overarching notion of sort of the heroine's or the heroic journey is kind of foundational in the entire 9-month process. I mean, we're gestating something new. We're on a quest for sure. And then on the monthly mythic themes, we get to explore the core coaching concepts and our own personal experience sort of around the notion of that theme. You know, I mean, I think that without sort of, I don't know how much specific detail, I don't know, those mythic themes are very juicy and are part of what is so exciting about the monthly material. But I mean, it's beautifully in alignment, taking these stories, these notions of Cinderella as an example, Cinder Girl, and how that is so relevant to us as people who want to share in the world, bring our gifts to the world, but also to have our struggles. So beautifully integrated.
And that's a great example. That's an example of you know, a personal place of woundedness or pain or grief or loss. And Megan and Jen, you both brought up working with grief and loss. You know, so that's a great example of the myth in the middle, which is sort of how I designed it, actually holds all of the material. So we have core concepts and basic themes.
For each month.
Right. So the myth in the middle, then the mythic themes lead us into or hold the middle of then the creative coaching processes, which are tangible tools, suggested ways to approach the creative work. I think one of the interesting things about mythic themes is it helps us to tap into our own stories. So when we talk about self as client, mythic themes are actually developing personal, you know, you might resonate with a single word or a sentence or one moment in that myth or that story. You take it into creative process. And remember, we're experiential learning. So we're using our art to deepen our own experience with our life, especially in this phase called self as client. And then we're looking through the lens of multiple perspectives to elicit that material that is skill building, is actually bringing us forward. I love that you shared that, you know, that there's, it sort of goes back to your fulcrum, what you just said about the program itself, that each monthly module is also held on a fulcrum and that there's a balancing point, right? It's interesting. Yeah. Anybody else want to speak to mythic themes in terms of how that element in the program affected you personally?
Yeah.
I'll speak to that. Oh, go ahead, Megan.
Jan and Megan. Jan first, then Megan.
Okay.
Some excitement around that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so glad that Claire asked that question, because
Yeah.
the myth in the middle, and this actually speaks to also what Susan brought up, and that is how the program is designed to support, and I loved how she put this, all of the complexities of myself as an adult learner. And I'm going to add into there myself as a very creative person, an artist who loves to go about things in a different way. And so you really live the journey of CDCC. It's not like you watch a video, you read part of an ebook, and you answer some questions, bing, you're done. No. And I love that Kat encourages you to access the material in any way that is comfortable for you or that inspires you. And I almost always would start with the myth in the middle. So before I read about coaching tools or any of that concepts that we were working with. I'd start with the myth because she's right. That embodied everything that you would learn in that module. And then I'd go right to the art making process, barely skimming. So I didn't really even know, but I trusted the process to be bringing that forward. And then I would go back into the more sort of traditional learning mode of reading and that sort of thing. But I always liked beginning in the middle and then working out in both directions in that module. And the freedom to do that, I think, is immensely important for creative people who learn in different ways and to really get the richness. So instead of being sort of, forced into this very linear pattern, it's really the spiral of learning. So I love that. So I'll let Megan talk about myth.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, Jen, about nonlinear learning, which is absolutely part of the invitation. Begin in different places in the program. It's important to honor our own learning styles, and highly creative people often learn in nonlinear ways. There's a certain blend, and I'd like Megan to speak to blended learning when she shares. There's a certain way that each of us have a unique way to meet the material, and it's going to serve us in a different way when it's blended in a different way. So the design of the program actually embellishes or enhances the ability to find a unique outcome within each module based on the specific blend. How you've met different pieces of the material is going to bring you to a different place with the material. So I love that that's part of what you shared. Thank you. Megan, speak to any of this that you would like to.
Sure.
Go for it.
I'll quickly build on what you just said and on what Janice said as well. For me, I'm learning disabled, have been forever, and have known since I was a very young person. So I've had to find programs that would accommodate me and work with the way that I learn. And I can say that this program was the most flexible, so much so that it took me a while to believe that Kat would be so understanding of my specific needs and as flexible as she was. And that really supported me beginning to I no longer needed to feel like I had to fight for how I learn. I could rest in that and really focus on letting the process guide me instead of having to feel like I'm always trying to make myself fit into the learning box. So that was incredibly powerful for me. For me, some of the way I learned too was to work into the artwork I was doing, to be with the artwork I was doing and let it guide me. But also there were times that I had modules where I felt like I wasn't moving forward or I wasn't ready. I couldn't quite grasp the full picture and how it worked with everything else I was learning. And then a month or two later, I would be working in a module that I'd have a huge opening and understanding, and suddenly I could go back to the previous module and it fit. Everything made sense suddenly. And I learned very quickly that I have to trust what's happening in the moment. If I'm getting resistance, sometimes it's good to, look under that rock. But also sometimes there's a purpose for it and a time, and to trust that the time will come. And that was really powerful to have someone like Kat who's saying, it's okay, just keep an eye on it. Keep reflecting on it. There will be a time, and we'll keep checking back in on it. And in fact, it worked out beautifully. So not only is there flexibility within the module, there's flexibility within the program. And you can be exactly who you are. In fact, the program requires you to be who you are and operate the way you do. As far as the myths.
Can I stop you for a minute and just say, as much as you had done a lot of work around that learning style and, what we call learning disabilities as a child are simply learning differences. And as adults, I remember telling my son this when he was a little boy. I said, someday you're going to be able to learn the way you learn, and it's just going to be how you do it. He's a high school dropout who's learned tremendously in the last, he's 30 now, right? So as adult learners, we get to claim our strengths and work around things that have been sort of pointed out as out of balance in the past. But I want to talk to you for a minute just about the story of how that lives inside of you. We do work with narrative process in the program. We're working with our stories because story and beliefs and ways of holding experience is part of how we live as humans. We're meaning makers.
Yeah.
And so an impasse and a place of resistance can be a stuck story. Even if it's been worked with for years, it can still hold that shame and pain and vulnerability. And you kind of dug deep into that midway, maybe even 3/4 of the way through the program, you realized, I'm here doing this work and everything matters. Everything counts. Can you speak to that for a minute?
Absolutely. One of the things I was doing at the beginning of the program, which was a struggle, was I had a hard time connecting that a lot of the work we were doing in the program was actually showing up in my real life experience.
Yeah, living energy.
I struggled to give myself credit for what just happened to be turning up in my life.
Yeah.
And so that was a real eye-opener for me. And I have to say that this, for me, is connected to the myth. So having a myth each month, myths are powerful because they so relate to what happens for so many of us in life across the ages.
Yeah.
And so working with a myth, in a way, really helped me, in a powerful way, really helped me to start looking at my life in a mythic way. Right. What is it I'm learning, and how do these skills that I'm learning, and how does the art that I'm making, how do I interpret a myth, and how do I interpret what's happening in my life? It helped me begin to learn to interpret the world around me and symbol, and look at those subtleties and see the larger message. So that was a powerful way that I began to learn to view life in a very different way. Start giving myself credit and see the learning that's happening in life, and how life really began to mirror everything that was being taught in the program. And I had very real world applications for everything happening in the program.
Yeah, and I like that you bring that up, because it's part of the program is designed to be a developmental tool. Listen, we're developmental beings. We're ever evolving. So it's intended to be that developmental tool to develop the language of mythic living.
Yes.
In fact, why else would we come into a program that has so much potency and potential for personal and professional change if we weren't interested in tapping into that? Not everybody will use that language, but when we think of our lives through the lens of the personal myth, and we say, ooh, I'm ready to stretch or expand or voice my work in a new way, it takes the kind of impetus to take that step across the impasse or the abyss or the unknown territory to cross over into that mythic realm of, I get to step into my life in a new way, and I don't know what it's going to feel like. That's mythic living. And as we start to practice it and expand on it, we actually get more conscious of it, right? Betsy asked a question. I have 2 goals right now in my life and business. I want to move into a more creative space, and I want to write a book, and I have no idea how to do this. As a certified archetypal consultant via Carolyn Mace, I want to integrate more of this type of stuff into my work and in mentoring and consulting. And I want to work with other consultants to build business. Can this help me with both? I think I'm going to answer this one, Betsy, and then in subsequent answers, if you all want to tap into some of these ideas, please do. One of the things I want to say about the program, it is a fantastic, and somebody already alluded to this, it's a fantastic way to synthesize all of your other modalities. this has been what I've heard over and over. Depth coaching by nature is about amplifying blended process. So for those of you who might come in, I'm a dream worker, I'm a Reiki practitioner, I'm a psychotherapist wanting to move my practice in a slightly new direction, I'm retired, I'm a facilitator wanting to build my repertoire and do more one-on-one work. I want us within the program to actually build on, yes, maybe other academic or educational experiences, but life experience. I actually want us to find our innate strengths and build on personal experience within the program. It's enormously beneficial to do that. And this is enough of a structured program. It's bringing in material that is akin to, it's synthesized down and distilled down and offered in a very easy way. But it is master's level programming. But it's not only master's level programming, and you don't have to write papers and, you know, get all up in your headspace. You can actually be embodied through the program and living it, like Megan just said. There are a couple junctures through the program that I invite projects. I've had people write books through the program. I've had people design their websites in the first trimester. I've had people do all kinds of levels of developing parallel process, creative process, art making as business development all the way through the program at different junctures. So that's just one of the benefits of my offering one-on-one during the program, is that there can be a design that benefits you exactly the way you want the program to help you. Having a certification, having done consulting work in a certain vein, material that's very, you know, aligned with the program, it's really going to give you more. You're going to find that there's certain ways that you're using what you already know and starting to catch that vision or step in more deeply. I encourage all the way along the program to apply the material in any context in your life, personally or professionally. I don't ask you to wait to use the work. If you're already working one-on-one or in group process, start to, you know, experiment with how the coaching tools can be useful. There is a formal practicum at the end of the program, very simple practicum compared to some. There is a way that we're building, skill building all the way through the program, but particularly in the second half of the program. And I think the process will help you with both, Betsy. I think that you'll start, I really encourage that first few months to be in it, just in it for yourself. But as you continue on, you're going to find that you might be building curriculum. You might be designing, you know, you might be popping with ideas and designing the work. So anybody who wants to comment on that, when I ask the next question, I think that there'll be some organic responses. But I do think that there are very specific invitational places, both for project development, which might be book, curriculum, something else, community-based projects, personal projects when it comes to business building, website design, and Mastermind, which is the developmental tool that I offer in the second half of the program that is parallel to the program material that is specifically for business building. So I hope that that answers, Betsy, and if it doesn't, then let me know. Ask another question in the Q&A. So here's another question. Everybody knows who is here on the line that this program is designed around the concept of art as process. And art as process meaning art making as a language of the soul. Art making as access to information that's held inside, consciously and even subconsciously. Healing, which literally means wholeness, and art as healing, is a huge field of experience that is part of depth coaching in this context, in this program. So we're working very specifically with art as healing. I want to talk about art, healing, and depth coaching techniques as sacred medicine. And I'm going to have a few of you answer this question. How, and let's define sacred medicine. Sacred medicine comes from the language of indigenous ways of knowing. It comes from a more shamanic approach, which I integrate into the program, along with many, many other approaches. If we look at our lives as healers, as guides, as leaders, if we have an archetypal connection with teacher or priestess or visionary, we're holding our ability to serve in a very specific way. I'm going to call that service, whether it's intentional, practical, tangible, or delivered in ways that are less, a little bit more esoteric. I'm going to call that service sacred medicine for the context of this conversation. Who would like to talk about art, healing, depth coaching techniques as sacred medicine through the lens of your life and the way you do your work? Megan's leaning forward. She's like this. Go ahead, Miss Megan. You start. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's interesting. I've always felt like a very spiritual person, but I haven't had any one tradition that has been the only way for me. So one of the things I loved about this program is how many different traditions, spiritual traditions, but also developing your own spiritual tradition. And for me, developing my own spiritual tradition through art was incredibly powerful. And I feel like that just sort of happened naturally in this program. I began to integrate in this program much more ritual into my own personal art making. So for me, I began to, before I would make anything, I would burn a little sage or ring a Tibetan bowl and kind of bless all of my art materials. And I've just seen that there's much more sacred ritual in the work for me. And having that integration happen really felt like it shifted the power of the work that came out, because I came to it with a different intention. I kind of went through a different process to begin the work. And I feel like my work has changed a lot and has, one, it helped me let go of a lot of the barriers I felt around what I could and couldn't do as an artist, what I was and wasn't capable of creatively. It helped me shed a lot of that. And for me, it also called a lot, I had a clearer lens to look through as to what the meaning of what I made was for me and my place in the world. Yeah, very powerful experience. I can also say, looking back, that my work continues to travel in that direction, and I think it's directly related to that experience.
Yeah, powerful. Who else? Because we all hold this in a slightly different way. We have different interpretations, different backgrounds, different ways of holding art as healing, sacred medicine, art as ritual, art, healing, and depth coaching. How and where they blend together for each of us may be slightly different. And also I love, there's personal practice. I mean, that art making is also our art as healing. It continues to be developed and held in that way for each of us. So who wants to pop in with that?
I can speak into it, Kat. I work with different kinds of people And when I'm working in a corporate setting, which is sort of my main focus, I can still bring the sensibility of structure and ritual, and creating sacred space in a way that I wouldn't use that language primarily with my clients because they're much more sort of mainstream folk,
Yeah.
dealing with maybe workplace issues and that kind of thing, or their own professional career path. But the sensibility is felt. The idea of intentionality and consistency and building structures that are supportive for secrets to be shared, or difficulty to be looked at. So I sometimes am able to use visual artwork with some of those individuals, but in my work inside my organization, the notion of narrative and story is the most powerful, and the values work that we learned about in the course are two of the most valuable sort of tools that I can, and notions I can regularly bring to my clients, because helping them understand their values and understand that their lives are really stories, and that their beliefs about what's happening are narratives, and that they can actually control their perspective on that, or consider other perspectives, or consider how they can start to shift the frame a little bit. So there's a way in which I can bring some of that to even mainstream people. And when I'm working with people who are more overtly creative or spiritual, who are more sort of aligned with my own personal sensibility, then like Megan, I can bring some of that more overtly in my language and in my practice. But it's wonderful that I can use this material to meet my clients where they are, with sometimes just some subtle shifts. So it's very interesting that way.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because listen, we're developing client-led work. Coaching by nature is future focused. Depth coaching has a broader contextual space where we are working with the past, the present, and the future, but towards the future in terms of healing and wholeness. This language is by nature, and the way I frame and hold the language is by nature more esoteric. It is languaged in a way that evokes more of a mythic, intuitive, maybe a shamanic sensibility, but it is completely practical and applicable to any style, with this fine-tuning piece that you just spoke to. And this is where, the nuances of defining and designing your particular way, your particular work, and the fact that you do it both ways, Susan, that you have simply defined, refined, relanguaged. And this is something we need to listen to our clients in group process and individual process, be true to the work that we do, but also be aligned with and responsive to the client's need and their personal language, their personal symbology, their personal stories, their mythic references. Often in depth coaching, and I'm just going to kind of add this in because I think all of you can relate. I'm going to look for nodding heads. I think in depth coaching, some of what we're developing is reading between the lines. That ability to see, to track, and to hold on behalf of the client what they're alluding to. Maybe they're not quite there yet, right? And as people change, their language may change, their needs may change, that may broaden out, that may really take a left turn. And you may find, ooh, I can integrate more because the client is ready. Or this technique, this tool could be really helpful here. I think that's wonderful because there's so much that's available. And you get to build towards your personal repertoire as a coach, but also start to see and notice how the work is expanding the field for individuals that are working with you. So you start to see certain trends perhaps, or certain ways that the work works in a contextual space. Like you said, I'm working more in an institutional setting, so that those clients have a certain way in which, you know, they meet the work, and I bring it in a certain way. And then in other settings, I do it differently. Great. Who else wants to speak to how do you regard art healing, depth coaching techniques, and sacred medicine? Darcy, are you going to speak to
Yes,
this?
please.
I want you to share a little bit about clinical applications, because we do have clinicians who are in the program too,
Absolutely.
along with lots and lots of other, you know, professions and experiential, you know, levels. But when you're speaking to this, maybe do a twofold like Susan did. Okay, great.
And actually, that's what I was entering in with, you know, initially just thinking that there are multiple ways of knowing, right? And there are multiple ways of expressing. And coming from, you know, as one human being, bringing in multiple, you know, lifetimes in one, many different experiences, many different roles, being able to embody those simultaneously or nurture all of them within this program is something that I did not anticipate and have, oh gosh, just the journey continues. Really just feeling how my, the connection that I have to identifying my own strengths, my own preferences, my own language, my own ways of expressing, and also being able to then see that in others, whether I'm sitting one-on-one or in a group, has been.
Let me point you back to the question a little bit.
Sure.
Art healing, depth coaching techniques as sacred medicine. In the context of like a clinical setting, let's say, where you're doing both one-on-one and group work, because I know you've done that.
Mm-hmm.
So how, you know, how do you hold that? How do you hold that particular blend, you know, for clients that are going through recovery issues, you know, who may not have that ability to see like much in the future? You're literally holding the potential for real healing in recovery for those who might be in early recovery or in a setting where they're feeling just bombarded by their past experience. So how does art healing and coaching sort of help in that situation? And how do you hold it as a kind of sacred medicine? Because that's clinical is a little bit more of a medical model, isn't it?
It certainly is, and where I was looping to, I know, I thank you for redirecting, is the sacred part of the sacred medicine is reconnecting to or remembering some of our essence. And in all of my clients, there has either been, you know, relating to recovery, either from, you know, an active behavior or grief and loss, and in the healing that's embedded in that. So, you know, this is really kind of a large topic to delve into, and it does pinpoint back to utilizing healing, utilizing the different ways of accessing that, including expression through art and expression through connection. You know, they can be combined and they don't have to be. You know,
I also like what you're sharing about this, you know, that it brings them back into relationship with essence, which is a healing connection personally. And I really resonate with remembering, because what so many times we're working with clients for something, you know, in a clinical setting in recovery, that's maybe a more, you know, extreme place of feeling tied to stories that are diminishing and demeaning. But remembering is such a powerful concept to bring us back into relationship with who we are in our essence. And I think that's a key place. In fact, I'm going to say that that's part of the heart of depth coaching, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is sort of our title today. So I think that you bringing up essence, remembering, and connecting, that it's, whether it would be in a group setting, and I love that you brought in, sometimes it doesn't include art making, but there's a creative process of connecting that's part of these coaching techniques. In fact, all of you can relate to, sometimes we're in a talk coaching model, and sometimes we're in a creative process model, and sometimes clients are creating in ways that aren't visible or identifiable. Other times clients are hands-on creating with you. Many times with my clients, people are creating between sessions, bringing back identifiable pieces as part of the language of the spiritual, the creative. I know I have, we train in the program to create coaching tools for clients who aren't creative, who feel that there's a particular impasse. And I bet a lot of us on this call right now can relate to sometime in your life when you felt like, I'm not very creative, I don't really see myself or feel that I'm an artist. The language I've used over the years is, we're all artists of life, but sometimes we have to build a bridge to the creative. I want to talk about this, art as healing and creativity in really broad context. We use very simple modalities within the program, but mind mapping and doodling and simple collage and, finding images on Pinterest that reflect the feeling or the story that you're working with. These are all very accessible ways, and they can be translated to clients actually by you developing potential coaching tools. And I think you've done that too, Darcy, where you've brought image work into clients where they can, choose what resonates and then develop, their sense of what they're working with through just a communication. Client-led coaching and relational coaching is one of our pillars of the program. So we're developing that along with narrative theories, along with expressive art practices, along with other core concepts or pillars of the program. Thank you. Who else?
Kat, I'll speak to this just briefly, this idea of sacred medicine and art being sacred medicine, because a lot of the people I work with already have an art background. They either are currently producing art, or they used to, and then life got in the way, or they've always wanted to, and now they have an opportunity to.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key things that is a turning point for so many of them is when they begin to understand that creating art has the power to heal them. And that art, so medicine, in terms of when you think of in shamanic or native ways, medicine is not necessarily a pill you take. It's not like that. It's entering into the power. So if you had eagle medicine, you're entering into the qualities and the power of what the eagle represents. And when clients enter into that power, and I see this all the time because there's this starting place and they're not confident, it's new to them and it's awkward, and then all of a sudden they'll have the breakthrough where this language of art in many different ways, not just visual art, they tap into the power, the sacred power of creating and using it as a language and tapping into their own sacred power, their own inner wisdom. It's so interesting to see that happen. So the sacred medicine of art is not only just about healing and becoming whole, it is about finding the power within yourself to express your deepest wisdom, your deepest needs, your deepest understanding. This goes back to Darcy saying, connecting with their essence. So this sort of shamanic and ritual way of using art as voice and power is really an important tool that I use and help people activate. So it's medicine for me, yes, in healing, but it's medicine in terms of sort of regaining your own power in your life.
Beautifully articulated, Jan. So much of what we find, and sacred medicine really alludes to accessing one's own source material. We talk a lot in the program about the material of life, right? But I love that you bring this in, that art is an access point, and that art making, this, you didn't say this, but I'll say that in the program we talk a lot about art making is energetic connecting. So even in the art making process, and we just see this over and over through the lens of self as client, which is why it's so powerful to have that experiential piece, that we're moving energy in our own lives when we're working with simple materials. And so I think that there's a piece of this that really develops the efficacy of it, to use a really like outcomes-based language. The proof is in the pudding, isn't it? Because we move into our own field experience over and over and over again. And then, as you're saying, I see this all the time with my clients. And there's a coming together or a connection with one's essence. And I'll say that it's at a stage of developmental growth. So each of us meet ourselves in the journey, in the creative process, working with creative depth coaches, working within the program, working with Art is Healing. We're meeting ourselves at the stage that we can actually move into relationship with whatever that material of life is. And then utilize the sacred medicine that is offered in that space. Someone was talking about, Susan, you were talking about sacred space to do whatever the work is of the moment, right? So I love this conversation. We could go on for hours about this, couldn't we? Like this whole topic. Okay, so I'm going to combine the last two questions that I had, and we're just going to sort of see where we're wrapping up. Any last Q&As, please, those of you who are watching, drop in. Here's one. Sometimes I find that I get ill after making some sort of artwork, but I've never been able to understand this energetic dynamic. Curious to see if other people find this and the ways of dealing with it. We talk about this actually at several junctures in the program, and it is common. When I started doing this work 15, 18 years ago, I regularly gave myself migraines because I didn't know how to work with the energy. So I think this is something that we work with in very specific ways at different junctures of the program. And it is a skill. It is a skill that can be honed. It's also something that we as depth coaches need to be aware of so that we're modulating the energetics of the material or the access that is opening to the client. So we're wanting to watch on behalf of the client, but we also want to move into our own experiences to practice personal modulation and also energetic flow. So yes, this is actually common, and it means that there's an intensity of embodied remembering within tapping into or accessing that material of life. One of the things I'll say, Claire, about this is that the narrative approaches that we talk about, the visual narrative, is the way to move this energy in a very, very useful, it's a very useful tool for allowing energy to move in and out. And taking discomfort, embodied discomfort, actually to the creative process is another way that we develop, real points of transition, because the body is trying to tell us something too. The body is actually a barometer of some of that energetic component. And Erica just asked, what is the size of a typical cohort? 20 to 25. sometimes a little less, never more than 25. And so it's quite an intimate process and not overly, not overly big. Energized, I think, in a perfect way to move through the program. That's been the history. So last question for each of you, and continue with the Q&As. Thank you. We will stay here and answer your questions. I want to know what the heart of depth coaching is for each of you, and also to contextualize that, if you can, about how you've grown your work, your voice, and your vision. We've talked about through the program, so I want to talk to a little bit to each of you about where you've grown your voice, your work, and your vision sort of from the end of the program to now, and what you're finding continues to be the heart of depth coaching. And, whatever comes for each of you in that context, please share, and I'll pop in with some questions if they show up. And we'll spend another about 10 minutes finishing up. So who wants to jump in first?
I could start, Kat.
Great.
That's a big question. And I think for me, the heart of depth coaching or creative depth coaching as a practice, and it's a practice, is about witnessing myself, and as Jan said, around personal power, moving into deeper relationship with my own power and my own desire to be of service to myself and others. And I think that art in my own creative practice is absolutely a component of that. But underpinning it is very much, I think, a compassionate relationship with myself that I'm also modeling and supporting and holding space for my clients to find that. Because I think that notion of being compassionate with self and living a values-based life is freeing. And I think that we live in an unfree world, or at least that's a story we tell ourselves. And I think that my clients, whether they're, they're vice presidents or they're, women who are on a spiritual journey trying to decide what they want to do post-retirement, is really about honoring themselves and being able to step into the authenticity and power of who they are. And for me personally, as I've, moved out several years now since I've been a student in the course, the magic has continued to work on me. The one sort of problem or challenge or deep-rooted story in my own life has been around my relationship with my body. And continuing to work with you and continuing to use these tools, I've fairly easily been able to totally transform my relationship with my body by shedding, releasing 100 pounds in a way that I never was able to do. I simply couldn't manage this piece of my life in any kind of healthy way. And it comes from stepping into myself and my power in a compassionate way, transformative. And it's all embedded in the tools and the processes from the work that we did in the course. So being able to own it and then move it forward into the world has been a continued gift, really, for me, I think, and others.
Beautiful. Yeah, extraordinary. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the heart of depth coaching and the evolution of your work, your voice, your vision.
I can jump in, Kat. And I love this question because depth coaching is such a multi-layered thing. It's such a multi-layered process. There's so many components to it. Is it parts work? Yes. Is it shadow work? Yes. Is it archetypal work? Yes. Is it all these things? Yes, it's all those things. But for me, at the heart, and this is true for myself and how this work has affected me, and I see it in the women that I work with, and that is depth work and depth coaching is the thing that allows people to access and create and develop a language to express their innermost being, their inner life, their inner landscape, the deepest part of themselves, their soul. You often refer to this as psycho-spiritual work. And what I find is that there's a tremendous sense of isolation because empathic people, people who feel deeply, people who have a relationship to the artist archetype or the poet, they're not encouraged in our society to really develop a language that their soul can speak. And so there's this muting, and we often joke about that on Zoom calls about you have to mute people, and what a horrible word that is to have to use, because it is sort of a grief and loss when your soul is muted. So to use art making, so visual and visual narrative, or to use verbal language, or to use embodied practices, to give a language to your innermost being and your innermost experiences is really important. And from that flows everything else: healing, becoming whole, working with your shadow, coming into compassionate relationship with your own body, as Susan mentioned. If you don't have a way to express that, none of that can really happen. So foundationally, for me, it's about creating the language of my soul that allows me to express. And of course, with coaching, depth coaching being relational, you have to speak the same language with that person. So everyone's dialect is different, but in the same way that archetypes are universal, there are enough commonalities among human souls that you can have your own unique personal language, symbols, imagery, practices, but the coach has to be able to get that and tap into that. So for me, fundamentally, it is a way to express your deepest soul in creative ways. And I think that's really the creative part of creative depth coaching, is developing that beautiful, beautiful language. I think that's the heart and power of it and the transformative aspect of it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you say that. And it reminds me of, I've often said jokingly, depth coaching for me is a lifestyle. Creative depth coaching conceptually is a lifestyle because it's a living language. And you really alluded to that. And we develop this from the inside out. We develop it in the program. There's a call to action. There's a stepping in. There's that rising up and finding. But our lives are a never-ending story. We are constantly developing that new edge and stepping in and the experiencing that language that allows us to get bigger. I really feel that what you and Susan just shared. So Megan and Darcy, thank you.
A couple of things that I just thank you for everything you've shared so far, Susan and Jan. Everything you're sharing is resonating for me. But to build on that for my work specifically, one is that I should say that when I went into the program, I was doing support for adoptive and foster parents, but I didn't see that yet as trauma work and I didn't see the place that creative depth coaching could relate to it or support it. And now it's hard for me to imagine it without that context. I can say that for me working, one is that I've stepped more fully into that work by going through the Creative Depth Coach program. And I see my gifts much more clearly, both because of the program and because of the ongoing practice that it helped me to develop in my own work, with working with my own past trauma. It helped me connect the difficult work of working through my own trauma and the ongoing journey of that to the gift I have to help others with that. And seeing that in different contexts now. I will say what's interesting is I kind of went into the program thinking, you know, this is what I want to do. I want to do artwork with every client in a private practice. And what's fascinating is that, like you were saying, Kat, it is a lifestyle. It's much more embodied for me. And I've gotten to the point where in the work that I do with trauma survivors, sometimes it is artwork, and a lot of the time it's not. A lot of the time, the way I work with art with clients is actually in my off time or between clients doing my artwork to help me through the next insights for them. So it's taken shape in different ways than I could have anticipated, and I've let it guide me, and that's been incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So I also should say that I think there's something about having this, once this practice is kind of embodied and developed and integrated into my professional work, there's a way of seeing the world that is very different for me than it was before, and a level of confidence and comfort in how I operate as a professional that I never could have gotten to without being here, and much more integrated than I ever could have expected between my kind of love of image and symbolism and all the pieces that were in place even before I came into the program, that I had no idea could integrate so beautifully into the work I do in the world.
Yeah. That's something to really stand on, something that, you know, again, alluding to that living language and that living energy of what you develop becoming such an all-encompassing part of your life, and, you know, leading you to feel solidly grounded in what you do and how you do it. And it's a beautiful thing. So thank you. Darcy, what do you have to share about the heart of depth coaching, what that means to you, how you experience it, and how you've grown your work, the voice, vision in the world, you know, as a result of this, of the Creative Depth Coaching Program?
Absolutely. And the, you know, integration, that word just, you know, rings a bell for me, that there's, it's undeniable, the ways I've become more integrated, and my life is becoming more integrated as I have through the CDCC process. The first few words that come to mind when I think of the heart of depth coaching is authenticity, acceptance and understanding, and creativity and community as an impetus. This has absolutely been an impetus and a milestone experience that is not a one-time thing. Now it's a way of life, and it's actually illuminated. It's illuminated my own authentic perspective that I didn't know how to tune into or identify or express. And it's turned some, you know, a great deal of confusion into much more clarity, both about who I am, what stories I'm feeding, how I identify as a person in the world, and also on a professional level, you know, how do I want to share my gifts? What really lights me up, and what is also practical, bringing magic and practicality together, because that's part of, you know, the industry of the world.
Yeah.
You know, really supporting others who are continually, you know, searching and seeking and desiring community, and connecting people with what they need within themselves and then the world.
Yeah. You know, so much of what each and every one of you expressed, I mean, this is really what I was hoping we would do today, is kind of paint a big picture, more than I can do by myself. And I can paint a pretty good picture by myself, but the heart of depth coaching to me is us. The heart of depth coaching to me is the people power. It's the collective field that we're creating together. I designed this program to bring what I discovered in my own work to others so that I wasn't alone doing this work. The heart of depth coaching is the field of depth coaching as a dynamic integratable container to expand this work in the world because we need it. So the heart of depth coaching to me is actually all of us who are drawn in to this field, who are working with art as healing, as a transformative tool, as an agent of change. When we tap into our own creative and allow it to be a catalyst in any context, in any situation, in any moment, you know, of our lives, and also a powerful way to integrate memory and experience to hold and explore our own stories and allow them to be energetic conduits that move us into a more aligned way of living and working in the world. That aligned life, that way that we will bring together all of the disparate pieces of who we are and what we've experienced to become bigger and allow ourselves to shine. That's the heart of depth coaching. And so it's us, it's all of us who are here, all of us who are listening later, all of us who are tapping in, saying yes, saying maybe, all of us who are in this field, listening to that deep feeling of there's more that I want to experience. There's a richness of life that I'm missing. I want to find my path there so that I can live there, so that I can work there, so that I can feel this and access it on a regular basis. And so that I can use my own creative coaching tools when things get bumpy or, you know, life goes sideways or I, you know, find myself back in my own grief process. We need this. This is a human need. And I think, you know, the heart of depth coaching is that there is a way to do this work in a more, I don't want to say defined, I want to say in a more developmentally aligned way, and that each of us as unique individuals, by walking this path, will develop exactly what it is. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the heart of depth coaching. I have one more question, hang on. Lots of food for thought, great. Listen, I'm going to send you what you need to know about the program. This is the second in a series of program materials. You're going to get the replay and you're going to get access to the application, the depth coaching page, the how to connect with me if you want to ask more questions. I'm inviting everybody on this call to connect with me one-on-one, to have that conversation about what you need, what you want, what you desire, what you're thinking, because if this isn't the right time, why not have that one-on-one call? All of the information that you need is going to be sent to you. The program starts mid-September. This is a call inviting you to take that next step of application and one-on-one call. But the heart of depth coaching, like I just said, is about you. It's about your experience, about who you want to be in the world. So I don't think there's any better way to talk about that than to have a one-on-one coaching call. So that's my invitation for you. Anybody who is responding this week to this masterclass, which will replay is only up for a week, to this panel discussion, will have a bonus, and that will be offered to you during that one-on-one call. So do connect in with that, and I send you off on this beautiful Sunday to have a wonderful day, and thank you all for being here. This is Kat Carasello.